Hello, everybody. I want to discuss the last round game from the Sinquefield Cup 2018 between Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces and Hikaru Nakamura with the black pieces. There have been a few videos made on this game already, but I want to give my take on it. And again, I am not using a chess engine. I'm not going into detailed opening analysis or computer prep, if you will, but we're going to discuss general principles that, when applied, will definitely help your chess game. So let's get into it, and we'll start right now. So the game started out knight f3, knight f6, d4. Pretty basic and standard opening Queen's Gambit declined with a little bit of Nimzo Indian option right there. But now you can see we're in a regular Steinitz variation of the Queen's Gambit decline, which is noted by this bishop coming to f4 as opposed to g5, creating more pressure on the center. Castle, e3, b6. This is all well-known continuation. Of course, there's different options. Usually, the main goal is to get an early c5 in from black, and that was one of the main antidotes for a very long time, and it's still played to this day. Of course, a lot of knowledge has been acquired since the early days of Steinitz, but bishop f4 is just as playable is bishop g5. It's just that bishop g5 puts a bit more pressure on the d5 square indirectly by constantly putting the question to this knight. So one of the early remedies was to get an early c5 in without this move b6. So continuing on here, whoops, after b6, Magnus just develops bishop d3, d takes c4. Of course, black saves some time by not capturing right away, but waiting until the bishop comes out and then capturing. For instance, if he didn't do b6 and he just played here, black would be wasting time because then white can just develop this bishop to c4 in just one move. Instead, he waits to move b6. Of course, the plan is to get this bishop out into the open. Notice these two pawns block the light square bishop. So one idea is to just simply solve black's problem of what to do with this light squared bishop by bringing it to a6 or b7. So after bishop d3, now black can capture and gain some time here. So d takes c4, bishop takes c4. Of course, the downside of that is now white has a pawn preponderance in the center, which black has to be careful to restrain before the center gets mobile and dangerous. Usually black will counterattack that by playing the move c5 at some point, which has some consequences, as you'll see as we go on. Now, one thing I want to mention real quick is that also that although the move b6 will help black solve the problems of what to do with this bishop, that it's usually a problem child. Uh, Once these bishops disappear from the board, you can see that black will have some weaknesses around these light squares. This is a consideration when playing the move b6 with the idea of exchanging the light square bishops is what are you going to do after the light square bishops are gone to mitigate the weaknesses that are created. There it is, bishop a6, queen e2, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4. So Nakamura has gotten rid of this bishop quickly, but now he has these light square weaknesses. Okay. Another option, of course, was also just to keep the pieces on the board and play a move like bishop b7, since diagonal is now cleared. However, he went for this trade of bishops, and now we can see the double attack here. And now black has to deal with the problem of um, what to do about the c pawn. c5 is played, so this move takes care of the double attack on c7 and also attacks white center. Remember, we don't want the center to become mobile and dangerous for black and start knocking black's pieces out of the way, etc. However, this opening scheme for black does have its downfalls, as we'll see in a minute. So after d takes c5, b takes c5, and now castle. So let's just take stock after 12 moves. So black has achieved a few things. One is he's gotten rid of his so-called problem child in the Queen's Gambit openings, which is often that c8 bishop, and he is also held white center from becoming mobile and hostile and pushing his pieces away from f6, etc. However, all of this comes with the price, and the price here is now that he has an isolated pawn on c5. Okay, nothing is for free. All right, and now we have a case that's very common in chess. We have dynamic play versus, or dynamic advantage rather, versus static advantage. Static advantage is what we see from the white side. If you look at Carlsen's position, it's pretty much perfect. There's no pawn weakness. Pieces are well placed, and it's pretty much plays itself. The rooks come to the c file and d file, and the basic plan here is just to put pressure on this pawn. This is black's only weakness in this position. Right, of course, he is just tad behind in development, but his only weakness here, static weakness, is this pawn on c5. Okay, it's a long-term weakness. All right, this forces black to seek a dynamic play here in order to distract white from the simple plan of just piling up on c5 and winning the pawn. Okay, so this fits Nakamura's style. We all know Nakamura is a dynamic and tactical player, so he's willing to take on this position in order to have this free piece play. And you'll see this in openings like the Teresh variation of the Queen's Gambit, decline if you please. So here, black is going to try to seek dynamic play to compensate for having that pawn weakness, free piece play. White is simply going to try to just win the pawn and use his positional superiority to crush black. So after 12 moves, I like white side, but we can't say that white has some kind of huge advantage. But I do think that white is slightly better based on his lead and development, of course, easy piece play, and of course this glaring pawn on c5. Okay, and white's pieces, all of white's pieces are just slightly better placed than black's pieces. So knight c6, natural move. There it is, rook ac1, rook c8, and now knight e5. Again, with this static weakness right here, Carlsen's plan is very simple. Start eliminating pieces gradually, and as the game becomes more and more simplified, it will become harder and harder to defend this isolated pawn, because the key with isolated pawns to remember is that they must be guarded by pieces. So if you eliminate the pieces, the harder it is to defend them. Also, understanding that black's play is going to be based on dynamism, right? And to be dynamic, you need piece activity. So by eliminating the pieces, which is what Carlsen is doing, you diminish the potential for activity and dynamic play from black. Queen b6. And we can see again, black cannot just sit still just on the defense of the pawn. So he has to play this fence walking game where he has to defend the pawn but also create opportunities. And we see here by queen b6, yes, he adds some more defense to this pawn, but he also attacks white. Knight takes c6, rook takes c6, and now Carlsen deals with that b3, which not only defends the pawn, but notice that it helps secure the square in front of the isolated pawn, so that that pawn will not be able to advance. h6. So we create a little loss for the king, but this move can be dangerous at times, as that it gives some tactical options to Carlsen that we'll see later on in the game. Okay, so maybe not h6 at that point, weakening the king side unnecessarily. Maybe just swing the rook out, right? Develop the next piece. But instead, h6 is played, and now rook fd1. So just common sense moves that any 2000 player could play at this point. Queen b7. And now h3 by Magnus. Now notice the difference. Now Magnus did the same thing that Nakamura did, but notice that Nakamura doesn't have a light square bishop here on f5, right? Threatening at some point to be able to sacrifice here. So it's definitely a difference here. Notice the dangerous position that white's dark squared bishop is in. And that's what I was saying, is that black's pieces are all slightly inferior to their white counterparts. So for instance, if you look at Magnus Carlsen's bishop on f4, it's a little bit better than this one on e7. His rooks are both better than the corresponding rooks. All right. Even the queen is a little bit more active for Carlsen. And the knights are probably equal, but all in the kings also. So all in all, and Carlsen has a static advantage in the fact that he has a perfect pawn structure and he has pressure on the c5 pawn, but also his pieces are slightly better. Okay, so basically Nakamura is in a situation where he's kind of forced to suffer here because he doesn't have the dynamic compensation for his isolated pawn weakness. So he's kind of stuck on the defensive here. And this is leads us into another theme I want to talk about. And there's the move rook c8. Again, was this move h6 necessary at the time? Probably not. Again, simple plan, this the assault on the c5 pawn. And what this does is this forces black to tie up his resources. And again, this is isolated pawn play gone wrong for the defending side. When you take on an isolated pawn, you must have compensation in form of piece activity. This is exactly what white wants, is to tie up all of the pieces on the defensive. They're not in attacking positions at all. And then what happens is, while all the pieces are tied up defensively, then the attacking player will switch attacks rapidly to another point on the chessboard. So watch what happens. So knight a4, knight d7. So we see all of these pieces, right, tied up. Look at all the pieces that are tied up now around c5 and on the queen side. And this queen is just a spectator. So rook d8, rook d2, and we already see the transfer coming. So now with this move, Magnus could be, right, threatening to come to c2, doubling up the rooks over there, or he could be just planning to move this rook on c1 to the d file with a double attack. Knight b6 is played. Another piece is traded off. Remember, this favors the attacking player in this situation, right? Just simply simplifying the position here. Rook takes b6, and now just simply taking over the d file, threatening to penetrate into the 7th rank. Bishop f6. Really simple chess. Rook d7. Queen a6, offering a trade of queens. Good move by Magnus. Now here he could have traded queens here, right? But you got to remember the tournament situations, the last round, and Carlsen is going for a win, right? He's trying his best here. So he needs a win, right? He's not trying to draw at this moment. So he doesn't want to, go into a situation like this here. Still a lot of play in this scenario. And black, has a little bit more relief than white would like to offer. So here he plays queen to e4, and while black is kind of distracted over here on the queen side, white switches targets. Remember, he had all this pressure on the c5 pawn. He switches targets, so he's willing to part with this pawn because he's creating a dangerous threat here, and it's based on this weakness that was created earlier. And now you see e5. The idea here is that this move is threatened here. Bishop takes h6, wrecking the queen side. And go into that in 1 second. So bishop takes h6, and now rook e8. And again, the reason why is, and you've probably seen it on other videos, but just real quick, g takes h6, and the idea is just rook takes f7, because the open ranks and files are very dangerous. King takes, and the queen will come in here, and then of course the king is forced back, and then the other rook just simply comes up to the 7th rank. And of course, if here, then it's a bad move, of course, then this rook just comes here. And that's why I was saying this move h6 earlier, probably not the best move, because it just created a target. It didn't help black at all. All right, it's just a little bit premature. So again, the objective switches from c5, and now black has to deal with this sudden king side attack. But just remember the principle, how the pieces were distracted, right, and forced to defend over here, you see, and then the attack switched. Then white switched his attack rapidly to the other side of the board. Rook e8, queen g4, and now we see all of these pieces congregated over here. Nakamura grabs the pawn. e4. Notice again the counterpart, right? The white's bishop is better than this dark square bishop. So not only does the pawn on e4 fix this pawn on a dark square on e5, it also potentially cuts out any kind of retreat of this queen getting back over to the queen side, king side over here to defend later on. Possibly, say this rook is gone at this point, and there's like a check or something, and then the queen can get back to defend. e4. Queen takes b3. All right. So the pawns are not lost by Carlsen, but just merely sacrificed in order to gain an attack. This brings me to my second major principle, which is a saying attributed to Capablanca a long time ago, which is position before material. Okay, so position first, then material, and this is a classic example of that. At this moment, Hikaru Nakamura is up a pawn, right, and he has an outside pass pawn, right, so he's up in material, But white has the better position because of his rooks controlling the open D file, right, uncontested, and his rook being powerfully posted on the seventh rank. Okay, and his queen and bishop having all of this pressure on G7. All right, so black has the material advantage, but position over material. Carlsen has the better position, and this is what gives Carlsen the edge in the compensation, although being a pawn down. Drops the bishop back to E3, and of course, remember I said that Carlsen wants a win here desperately, so he doesn't just grab, just pick up this pawn, right? Boom, he comes back, bishop to E3, rook B7, rook 7 to D6, the obvious threat capturing there. Bishop E7, rook 6 to D5. Again, see, back to the C pawn, right? Attack again. And finally, Magnus evens up the material. So bishop takes C5, rook takes C5. And now offering trade of queens again at this point. And again, needing a win, he declines that offer at this point in the game. All right, and that's another principle, like a sub principle, is that you only want to trade pieces, and it sounds like common sense, but I want to say it. You only want to trade when it's beneficial to you. Here, of course, Magnus is trying to avoid draw scenarios, and so therefore he's not going to the this ending. And Nakamura has defended pretty decently, right? There was an attack on his king side, attack against the c pawn, and he's defended adequately. And now it seems like if he can get this a pawn rolling, right, the outside pawn rolling, that he should definitely at least be able to draw with the threat of this pawn. And that's what he's trying to, that's what he's banking on. Figuring trade the queens off, get the rook behind the pawn, start pushing, and, handshake soon. Magnus plays this move, queen e2, and prepares to stop this pawn. Right? Notice a5 can't be played at this point. And so from here on, for the next couple of moves, you are going to see great instructive play on how this pawn is demobilized. Rook d7. Rook takes d7. Queen takes d7. Rook d5. Again, notice the activity and superiority of the white pieces. Both on the d file. Meanwhile, these two pieces aren't really working together good. But notice how this rook on e8 is placed defensively, right, guarding e5. And Carlsen's rook is on a beautiful outpost on d5 with an attack on the e pawn. Rook a8. Now, what's the idea? He wants to push, right? You got the queen here on c7, guarding a5, and if black can get this going, this is good. This is good for black, because then soon white will be forced on the defensive here. So how do you stop this? You attack. Rook d7 again. 7th rank. Queen to c4. Good move by Nakamura, attacking the e pawn, but also preventing moves like queen a2, for instance, with the attack here on f7 as well as on a7. F3, so just simply solidifying that e pawn for good. So white does not have to worry at all about these this pawn structure, and if need be, can just tuck his king away. There it is, check. King h2, nothing to worry about. Now, Nakamura wants to play the move a5, but however, there's a problem. This rook is unprotected, so therefore, if rook d8 check would occur, rook takes d8, queen takes d8 check, king here, for example, and then it'd be very difficult to continue to advance here. So for example, let's go back. So rook d7 here, right check here, and Naka did that move. Now, again, you can play here. And here's another option where the queen would get overworked in this circumstance. Rook d5. The queen will probably have to go, let's say perhaps to e5 here. And then say if rook here, then you will have some type of repetition. So perhaps at this moment, you would transpose right back into this variation here. And of course, I don't think Carlsen will want to repeat the position here. Here. Here, and maybe if he needs to bail out, a draw is possible here. But I'm not sure I can see a positive advantage of continuation for Carlsen right here. So a5 here is a critical move. I'm wondering if I'm overlooking something here. Let's see, queen d5. And he just trades. That's no good. Yes. Yes. Queen a2. This must be defended. And then we can follow up with rook d5. Definitely not rook f8, because just simply that. And here we have the same thing with this double attack here. So a5 is premature. Sorry about that. I had to look at that for a second. Again, like I said, I'm not using the engine. Queen c6 was played in the game. And like I said, I believe that's why a5 couldn't be played, because that is the move that Nakamura wants to play. So instead, he plays this move, queen c6. Of course, this avoids scenarios with the rook a5 hitting the queen later on, and it also prevents this move queen a2 from happening, because now the rook is actually attacked. So rook d6 hitting the queen comes back, and of course he keeps it attached to this rook. So again, there's no moves like that, queen a2. And now you can see here rook a6, and this prevents the a pawn from moving, period. And this is bad news for Nakamura, because he wanted to keep that pawn mobilized. So rook a6, queen e7, queen e3, and now we see again Notice the quality of the pieces. Blacks are passive, whites are active. Whites pieces always a little bit better than blacks. I'm just gonna go a little faster because this was like a long game. But we see the assault again on the A pawn. But again, it looks like, the game's, probably gonna teeter out. You got two rooks. Excuse me, got a rook and queen versus rook and queen on the pawn. Everything's defended. Yeah, you have 4-3 on the king side, but how to make progress. So you see some maneuvering going on. Nakamura is just shuffling across the seventh rank. Black is passive, but he's holding. And for several moves, you see this going on. So finally, this move might have been a mistake also by Nakamura, is because the queens are now forced off the board because the queen is pinned. The queen is pinned to the king after this move. So now this move, queen a2, forces the trade of queens. Of course, rook a2 is ridiculous. But excuse me, rook b3. So I think that was a mistake by Nakamura too, queen f7, because now the queens are forced off, and as long as the queens were on the board, I don't think Carlsen could have won this game because there was always the opportunity for the queen to eventually get in here somehow and harass with check. Okay, once the queens are off the board, this creates a lot of play opportunity for Magnus now because it's just the rooks now. So I definitely think that was a mistake. Okay, maybe just something like that, right? But I think Nakamura got caught, slipping. Just kind of fell asleep a little bit here and allowing this to happen. Okay, so now again you got the active rook versus the passive rook, and now this king, which was kind of forced to hide out in the corner, has all types of freedom now to get involved, right? Get involved in the game. So let's see what happens. Boom. So general principle in these rook endings, again, moving the rook as far up the board as possible, putting pressure on the pawn. Again, keeping this guy passive. He can't really do nothing at this point. Now, of course, you can't let this king come all, get all down here and get aggressive. Got a 4-3, and you want to make this 4-3 majority strong, not a crippled majority, right? In other words, you don't want a scenario where it's like this, like say this pawn is here, and then you got this king here or something like that. Or, a scenario like this. I wish I could, yeah. Let's imagine that pawn is there, and this pawn is here, right? You don't want the four pawns to be crippled by the 3 pawns, right? Like in a minority attack. So Magnus plays h4, and the idea is real simple. Play king h3, and then have a healthy pawn majority. Play g4. Keeps the king from penetrating. Rook f7, again, passivity. Check. And now Magnus plays g3. Here, to me, I believe is the fatal mistake that Nakamura made in the game. Right, he made a couple of mistakes. One was the allowing the trade of queens, the queen f7. This to me was the fatal error right here. It's too committal, right? I think he got a little too impatient. Yes, and I think he believed that he had like a fortress here, right? That there would be no way that with this rook on the 7th, that's going back and forth, that Magnus could do anything. Now, again, this is the ultimate in being passive because now one of these pieces, either the rook or the king, has to stay and keep watch over this pawn for the rest of the game. because the king can't wander over here because the pawn would just go boom, 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 and queen, right? Same with the rook. The rook has to keep an eye on this guy, and again, watch this pawn. Nakamura's idea was to jettison this pawn, right? Become active with the rook, and he figured that he could just keep this pawn on h5 safely blockaded. So that was the idea behind g5. It was a miscalculation. I just think he was just a little got impatient there, right? If anything, just leave these pawns be, right? Leave them be. If you have to, if you have to move that, you play a move like this. But again, you can end up in the scenario again with one of the white pawns missing. It's a 3-2 that looks, you know, like that. I think ideally just leave these. Okay, just giving them this passer like this. No, I don't agree. So King G7, but again, he had a plan, and sometimes having a plan is better than not having any at all. Rook B7, Rook A3, and Carlsen's plan is real simple. He's just gonna march the king up here and get in these weak light squares. Get as close as possible. Of course, Nakamura's plan is very simple. He jettisons this pawn. I mean, he created this pawn when he played this plan when he played G5. And the idea again was to not be passive with the rook, but become active enough where uh the white king wouldn't be effective. So King F2, King Rook B2. This is Nakamura's plan. He's like, this must be a draw. However, Carlsen had a great plan to basically use the rook as a bodyguard to escort his king to safety. Rook A7. And here begins the plan. So first he takes over his second rank. Of course, at this point, with this pawn here, Naka can't afford to trade rooks. This allows room. Again, this is like a presidential bodyguard, this rook. Just walking the king out. Okay? So now the king has greatly improved his position from G2, right? Look where the king is now. So now there's this barrier here that Nakamura has created. And basically, Carlsen is going to do the same thing, is create a situation where this rook is going to be an escort and allow the king safe passage. And again, it's all due to this pawn being passed. Okay. So he gets the king in the optimal place. And now, watch the magic. There's this threat right there to this pawn. And notice how he does everything with Tempe too. So first he threatens, right? Because he's going to do it on Nakamura's time. Checks. Boom. Look at that. Let's look at it again. We don't have instant replay. We're going to make up our own instant replay. Boom. So first, second, and look at that. Beautiful maneuver. And now the king is free to cross over. Right? The check is meaningless. And again, we go back to one of our earlier themes that we talked about. Position versus material. Because you might be like, hey, Nakamura's going to clean up now, right? He's going to, rook takes f3, etc. Doesn't matter because the position is so strong for white. King passively placed on the back rank, combined with the white's pass pawn at h5, combined with the rook dominantly posted on a7 combined, right? It's like a math equation combined with the king powerfully placed on the 8th rank. It spells doom. It doesn't matter how many pawns that Nakamura picks up down here. His position is so bad that the material that he gains is not going to be a factor. King starts walking. King d7. Rook takes f3. Okay, material is restored, but the position is abysmal for black. King tied up on the back rank. Rook f4. There goes the pawn. Okay, h6. And now the problem with this situation is with this pawn guarding this square, if black steps over, say, king f8, then there's always going to be the mate, for example. And if black steps over to h8, this allows the king to step in at some point. Therefore, so king h8, rook b7. That's a Zugzwang situation. If here, then Nakamura can slip out there. So therefore, utilizing the power of Zugzwang, he just plays rook b7. Okay. The idea is that no matter what black does, it's a bad move for him. So for example, if he takes one of these pawns, then the king can infiltrate this position. I'm sorry, let me get rid of that arrow. If he takes one of these pawns right here, so let's say rook takes e4, king takes f6, and then you get to this square. Notice keeping this rank clear. So then the other move he has is just simply rook to b7. Excuse me, not rook to b7. King g8. Right, which happened in the game. And remember, the idea is to keep this rank open. Like, you don't want to obstruct this because you don't want the king here. So rook g7 check. And now with the rook here on g7, now the king can step in because there's no longer access to this square. So let's just look at that again real quick. Rook f4, h6, king h8, rook b7, king g8. Again, not this move right here, because that would be an error. You know, not this, because then that happens. King g8. And now, again, with the rook here, as opposed to being here, now the king can safely come in. King f7. Again, it's Zugzwang. Like, what else is black gonna do? And he could have resigned. He could have resigned. He could have resigned here. After this move, he could have wrapped it up. Eddie takes the pawn. Rook takes e4. King g6. Rook a4. And then mate is on his way. Rook h7 check. And then he resigned here. The idea is if king to g8, there's really no resources here for white. Excuse me, for black. Okay, so for instance, you could play a move like rook c7, threatening mate here. Okay, notice there's no way to check because of the pawn on f6. So we had to do something like that. And you get mated. And if you come out the other way, then you just can push this pawn Again, after rook c7. Um, Only thing, another move black could try to do is, again, just come back here, guard the back rank, rook a8. And you could just win probably several ways, but one way is just push this pawn here. Check. Here. And then you can gobble up these pawns. Or you could torture black some more. So you can play moves like this. Then he has to let's see. Check. Then you would just have to keep checking to prevent the mate. Say for instance, check here. And then you can just start rolling these pawns and then win like that. There's a couple of other ways, but that was just a quick demonstration of a possibility. So anyway, after 97, rook h7 check, Nakamura resigned. So again, just simple principles to take away. Again, you have your dynamic advantages versus static advantage. Again, be careful of trading off into end games. We saw a big mistake. Again, queen f7, allowing the queen and king, forcing the exchange of queens in Magnus' favor. Notice another principle to take away is notice how he only exchanged when it was favorable to his position, because Nakamura offered several queen exchanges earlier, which Carlsen turned down. Oh, be careful of making committal pawn moves. Notice how Nakamura played g5 and allowed that pass pawn because he probably thought he had a fortress. And, it turned out, to just kill him in the end. Also, learn from Magnus's technique of how he was able to escort his king using the rook, using his rook to like as a bodyguard or shield. And another thing to take away too is notice how Magnus was able to, how he switched his attack, how he switched the focus of his attack. First it was the isolated c5 pawn, and then all of a sudden he switched to attacking Nakamura's king. That's another thing to take away. Sometimes, you might have two attackers. The opponent has two attackers, right? You can't do nothing. Work on finding another item to attack in the position, and usually you can shake things up like that, and your extra mobility in the position will usually prevail. The opponent won't be able to defend faster than you can attack after a while. And I think the most important lesson to take away in our close is, remember, position over material. Always position over material. If the your position deteriorates from taking the extra material, don't go for it. Always keep the dominating position, and we saw that with Magnus even in the end. As you can see in this position, Nakamura is a pawn up, but forced to resign because of the checkmate threats. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please like and subscribe. Check the links below, and I'll see you guys on the next video.